thank you for joining me. I'm Yolanda and we've got Holly here as well. And we work for the Bay programme. Now, as you might know, today, the 14th of April, is National Dolphin Day. So to mark this, we're having a talk on the incredible intelligence of dolphins. Just a few housekeeping points before we start. This talk is being recorded, and depending on how well it goes, we might put it online. So if you're not comfortable with your face being online, please make sure you keep your video off. Please also keep yourself muted. The talk will be sort of 40-45 minutes with a bit of time for questions at the end. If you have a question, please put it in the chat and Holly will then sort through the questions. And you can put questions in the chat at any point throughout the talk. Now, I'd just quickly like to go over the natural history and biology of dolphins. So this slide shows the classification of dolphins. They're in the kingdom Animalia because obviously they're animals. And then they're in the phylum Chordata because they've got a spinal cord. And we then sort them into the class Mammalia because even though they live their whole lives in the ocean, they're actually mammals. There are three defining characteristics of mammals. The first is that they have these three little bones in their ear, the malleus, incus, and stapes, and dolphins have these. The second is that mammals, and only mammals, feed their young with milk. In the case of a blue whale, which is the largest animal ever to have lived, the baby blue whale, called the calf, drinks 450 litres of milk every day, allowing it to put on weight at an impressive 108 kilograms per day. And last but not least, all mammals have hair or fur. Now, you might be thinking that dolphins don't look very hairy, and you would be right, but baby dolphins are actually born with a very, very, very faint moustache. And this is really useful because it helps them to find their mum in the first few days of life. And the hair then falls out when the calf is a few days old. Next, we sort dolphins into the order Cetacea, because they're cetaceans. This is a group that includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So if we have a look at the most common dolphin in the world, fairly unimaginatively called the common dolphin, just to quickly go over the structure, it's got the blowhole that it breathes through, and then it's got this dorsal fin on the back. And this is really useful because it helps the dolphin to balance in the water. It's also got these pectoral fins, and they're used for balance and also for steering as the dolphin swims through the water. And at the back, we've got the fluke at the end of the tail, and this is used to propel the dolphin through the water. Dolphins, they've also got quite a nice thick layer of blubber. So because they're mammals, they're trying to maintain a constant body temperature, and yet they're splashing about in quite cold water. So they've got this nice layer of fat to help them stay nice and warm. And if you look at the shape, you can see that they're nice and sort of streamlined, quite thick in the middle and then thinner at the ends. And that helps them to move really easily through the water. They've got this lovely kind of torpedo shape. Now, most dolphins have got quite good eyesight, but they've also got an extra sense called echolocation. So the dolphin produces clicks, and they send these clicks out into the water. And the vibrations travel through the water and then bounce back off objects in the water, whether that be ships or predators or food. So by listening to the echo, the dolphin can build up a detailed picture of its surroundings. This is really, really useful because it works even when it's dark or the water's very murky. Now, you might be wondering where this bizarre and beautiful group of animals actually came from. If we go back to the very beginning of the story, about 4 billion years ago, life first evolved in the oceans. And a few billion years after that, some animals left the oceans to live on the land. From these evolved the earliest mammals about 200 million years ago. And these really took off after the dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago. About 50 million years ago, there was this mammal called Pakicetus, which lived completely on land, feeding on small animals. And it began to spend more and more time in the water, eventually evolving into Ambulocetus. This led to it evolving webbing to help it to swim, and the tail became more of a swimming tool. It evolved into Cocytus and eventually into Dorudum, and this is one of the earliest whales. You can see the back legs have got smaller and smaller, and the front legs have turned into flippers. It's thought that Dorudum is the ancestor of all whales alive today, and also all dolphins and all porpoises. So these animals now live completely in the oceans, but if you were to look at the skeleton of any modern day cetacean, you would see that they've still got these tiny floating hip bones, and these are the remains of those back legs. So just to make sure you're all paying attention, we're going to attempt to do a quick quiz, a quick poll on Zoom. So Holly, if you could do the honours.
Yep, I'll just put it up now. Okay, that should be launched. Yeah, we're getting some answers coming through. So you should be able to see a little pop-up screen. You're able to click what you think are the dolphin's closest living land relatives.
It's like being on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? What is the dolphin's closest living land relative? Things on buzzers, all vote now.
We'll just give a couple more seconds. A few more people left to answer. Okie doke, I'll stop the poll now. So any last minute answers, and then we'll end it. Okay, yeah. Right, so I'll share the results with you. There you go.
Everyone apart from me, I think, can see this. So what
was really?
What
okay.
Are the results, Holly?
Yeah, so what we've got is 25% of people said pigs, 4% of people said camels, 50% of people said hippos, so that was the most popular one, and 21% of people said penguins. Okay, so if you want to give us the answer.
Well done to the 50%. The closest living land relative of dolphins is actually the hippo. So if you think about it, hippos, like dolphins, they spend a lot of time in water, and their nostrils have actually moved a bit higher up the head, not quite to the top like it has with dolphins, but a bit higher up to make it easier for them to breathe when they're in the water. So it seems a bit of a shame in some ways, because animals spent billions of years getting used to living on land, and then cetaceans went back into the oceans. But they're now fantastically adapted to living in the sea. So, for example, as well as the blowhole having moved to the top of the head, dolphins can sleep with half of their brain at a time. So half of their brain is asleep, while the other half is awake on the lookout for predators. Dolphins are also able to hold their breath for about a quarter of an hour, which is quite good when you think that we can only manage about 2 minutes, but it isn't half so impressive when you compare it to some of the whales. The record for the longest time ever to hold a breath belongs to a Cuvier's beaked whale, which managed to stay underwater chasing squid for an incredible 3 hours and 42 minutes. Now, superficially, dolphins look quite similar to sharks. There are a lot of similarities to look at them, and they fulfill similar ecological niches. So they both spend their entire lives in water, and they're both carnivores. But there are actually all kinds of differences. Dolphins obviously breathe air, whereas sharks get their oxygen from their water using gills. The tail movement is also different. So dolphins' tails move up and down, and sharks' tails move side to side. Dolphins are warm-blooded, so they're trying to keep that body temperature, whereas sharks are cold-blooded. And dolphins will spend years and years and years and years and years looking after their babies, whereas mummy shark swims away from her babies just as fast as she possibly can. So sharks and dolphins are separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolution, and yet they look quite similar. This is an example of convergent evolution, where animals that are not closely related independently evolve similar features because they live in similar environments. Worldwide, there are 42 species of dolphins, and here are just a few of them. The smallest and rarest is the Hector's dolphin, which is only found around New Zealand. The largest species of dolphin is actually the orca, also known as the killer whale. These are often mistaken for whales, and admittedly the name doesn't help this, but they're in fact the largest species of dolphin. The way, or one of the best ways, to tell the difference between whales and dolphins is to look at the position of the dorsal fin. If the dorsal fin is in the middle of the back, you're looking at a dolphin. If the dorsal fin is 2/3 of the way down the back, it's a whale. You can get dolphins in just about any aquatic habitat you can think of. The Ganges river dolphin can be found in the foothills of the Himalayas. And the pink river dolphin lives in the Amazon River. We've got the hourglass dolphin that lives around the Antarctic and subantarctic regions. And meanwhile, we've got the rough-toothed dolphin splashing around in tropical seas. Orcas are thought to be the most widespread mammal on the planet after humans, and they're found in all the world's oceans, from the Arctic to the Antarctic and all the places in between. Now, people often think of dolphins as being quite exotic, and that's certainly true for some of them, but we actually get a lot of species of dolphins around UK waters. There are populations of bottlenose dolphins in Cardigan Bay in Wales and in the Moray Firth in Scotland. And we also get smaller groups or individuals found in other areas, including off the coast of Cumbria. This beautiful animal, the Risso's dolphin, can be found around the UK. And we also get the white-beaked dolphin, the Atlantic white-sided dolphin, and the pilot whale, which is actually a dolphin around UK waters. Now, dolphins are widely considered to be one of the most intelligent species on the planet, but it can be very difficult to measure intelligence. One way of investigating intelligence is to look at the size of an animal's brain. Animals with larger brains do tend to be more intelligent. Now, big brains tend to be in big animals, and it's often assumed that large animals need large brains to control their large bodies. So if this is the case, when we're comparing the brain size between two different species, we should compare the ratio of brain weight to body weight. So if we look at the mass of an animal's brain relative to its body size, we're the champions. Humans have got the highest brain mass relative to body mass. And we can see that the bottlenose dolphin and the common dolphin also score very highly on this. Other dolphins, such as the orca and the pilot whale, which, as we'll see later, show quite sophisticated behaviour, score extremely badly on this test. However, there's actually not a lot of evidence supporting the theory that relative brain size is a better indicator of intelligence than absolute brain size. Instead, there's growing evidence from testing species with different brain sizes that absolute brain size might be a better indicator of intelligence than relative brain size. So if we look just at the weight of different species' brains, we're the third one down, and we're not even close to the smartest. If we compare ourselves to the bottlenose dolphin, they beat us. And if we compare ourselves to orcas, we're not even close. The animal with the heaviest brain is the sperm whale, which has a brain weighing about 8 kilograms. Now, while whales tend to live quite solitary lives, dolphins usually live in groups. The way the groups are organised can be divided into two key types: fission-fusion societies and matriarchal pods. So fission-fusion societies are very, very unstable. This is where dolphins come together to form a large group, and you might get hundreds or even thousands of individuals in that group. This is the fusion part, when they're all joining together. These individuals stay together for a few hours, maybe a few days, and then they separate into smaller groups and go their separate ways. Some dolphins often form mixed pods. For example, the common dolphin, which we can see in the picture, they're not too fussed what species they hang out with, they just don't want to be on their own. So you might get them with striped dolphins, or maybe even with turtles or seals or humans. On the other hand, matriarchal pods are a lot more stable. They're centered around one or two of the eldest females, and they have very strong, unique identities. For example, the language of squeaks and clicks and whistles used for communication can be very different between different groups of the same species. As a general rule of thumb, smaller dolphins, like the common dolphin, tend to form fission-fusion societies, whereas the larger dolphins, like the long-fin pilot whale, which we can see in the photo, and the orca, tend to form matriarchal pods. Being in a matriarchal pod has got a lot of advantages for the species. So the animals know each other very well. They've been together for their whole lives, and they can expect to stay together until their death. So they're much more likely to cooperate, they can trust each other, and they're not constantly competing against each other. But then there is a downside, because the strong bonds formed between animals in matriarchal pods mean that if one of the animals gets into trouble, the others will follow. So, for example, in the case of pilot whales, the oldest female, the granny, leads the group. And if she becomes confused or disorientated and ends up getting stranded, the rest of the pod will follow Granny onto the beach and will become stranded themselves. Their bonds are so strong that the pod will refuse to return to the water until Granny is safely back in the water as well. So, unsurprisingly, this does make pilot whales particularly susceptible to mass strandings. It's thought that dolphins are able to communicate through making whistles and clicks and squeaks. The dialects of cetaceans can vary from one group to another, even among members of the same species. For example, different pods of orcas can be identified by the noises they make. Different pods that are in the same clan, meaning that they're all distantly related, have got a lot of similarities in their dialects, whereas pods from two separate clans have completely different dialects, a little bit like languages and accents in humans. And here's a little clip showing what dolphin squeaks sound like. Now, dolphins do communicate a lot. They make a lot of these squeaky noises, it's not actually thought to be a complicated language. It's thought to be more a case of trying to strengthen their bonds. But dolphins do use signature whistles to refer to individual animals in the same way as we have names for each other. Cetaceans aren't given these signature whistles at birth, but instead a cetacean signature whistle develops over time and can change. So, as an example, when male dolphins form alliances, their signature whistles become more similar to each other's, and that's thought to signal to potential competitors that they've got a really strong bond, they're really, really friends. They like each other so much that they've all got the same name. And strangely, male dolphins tend to develop signature whistles at first that are quite similar to their mummy's signature whistle, whereas female dolphins develop signature whistles that are more similar to those of other community members. Dolphins have got pretty good memories for these signature whistles. It's actually been found that captive dolphins can remember and strongly react to the signature whistles of dolphins that they lived with 20 years ago or earlier but haven't seen since. Now, one of the most important things for animals is the ability to pass on knowledge rather than individual animals having to learn everything from scratch for themselves. Dolphins, being particularly intelligent animals, are able to learn new skills. And that means that there is a massive advantage to being able to pass these skills on, especially to their offspring. It is also worth remembering that cetaceans invest a huge amount of time and energy into each of their offspring. Whereas fish spawn millions and millions of eggs, dolphins give birth to one calf at a time, every 1 to 5 years. So each calf is incredibly important. Whereas nearly all of the fish eggs will die, the cetacean calf has got a high chance of survival. This is because it drinks its mother's milk and it's protected by its mum and the other cetaceans in the mum's community and social network. The calf is exposed to lots of information about hunting and where the community lives and what they eat and how their social relationships work. And as we'll see in a few minutes, it looks like dolphins intentionally teach each other skills as well. One way in which cetaceans can teach each other skills is through imitation, through copying what other animals do. They usually copy other members of their species, but in captivity, they have been observed copying humans' actions. For example, in the case of one bottlenose dolphin who was kept in captivity, he observed a diver cleaning algae from his tank and then learned to clean the tank himself and got quite obsessive about it as well. Another interesting case was a female bottlenose dolphin, christened Billy by her human companions, who was found trapped in a canal lock and was taken to an aquarium for a few weeks to recover. While she was there, she was housed with a few captive bottlenose dolphins who'd been trained to perform tricks, including tail walking, where a dolphin beats its tail to emerge vertically from the water. After 3 weeks, Billy was released back into the wild and was monitored by volunteers. And they were amazed to see that Billy had started doing tail walking. Billy had never received any training during her time in captivity, so she must have learned tail walking from the other dolphins she was housed with. Even more amazingly, the other wild dolphins in Billy's pod also started tail walking, having learned the trick from Billy. To this day, over 30 years after Billy's release and several years after her death, tail walking is still a popular activity among this group of dolphins. Dolphins can also learn through vocal learning, the ability to reproduce a sound they've heard. They can spontaneously mimic noises by other dolphins in the wild and have actually been known to mimic sounds produced by completely different species. In one case, a young orca became separated from other orcas in the wild, but was often seen in close association with sea lions. This orca learned to produce very convincing sea lion barks as a result. Another method of communication is through non-vocal signals. For example, a pod of bottlenose dolphins living in a New Zealand fjord appeared to initiate travel through side flops, where they jumped out of the water and then landed on their sides. They also slapped the top of their flukes against the water to show that they'd stopped travelling for the time being. These signals appeared to be unique to this population of bottlenose dolphins. It's also been suggested that in some cases, dolphins may breach completely out of the water to alert other dolphins to a particularly good food source. Some species of dolphins can show amazing social behaviour. Orcas share food with each other, and some groups of orcas even have greeting ceremonies. And dolphins can be very playful animals. This includes jumping into the air, twisting and turning, chasing each other, and playing with pebbles and seaweed. So, for example, balancing them on their pectoral fins or throwing them back and forth to each other. And dolphins are often attracted towards ships because they enjoy playing in the waves made by boats. Dolphins have also been observed using tools, as is the case of a group of bottlenose dolphins in Shark Bay, Australia. Some of the dolphins in the bay used sponges gathered from the seabed to protect their nose when they were rooting around in the seabed looking for fish. A lot of the fish have got defensive venomous spikes, so using these sponges stopped the dolphins from getting a venomous spike to the nose. This is particularly interesting, partly because it's an example of a non-human species using a tool, which always gets biologists excited, but also because not all of the dolphins in Shark Bay do this, and the ones that do are not all related to each other. This implies that rather than being due to a genetic quirk, the dolphins have actually learned from one another. Now, we'll have a look in more detail at two of the best known dolphin species. The first is bottlenose dolphins. These are probably the best known dolphin in the world, partly because they're so widespread, partly because, regrettably, they're one of the species that has most commonly been kept in captivity, and partly because they have a natural curiosity, so they're likely to approach people. These live in fission-fusion societies, but although these groups change, bottlenose dolphins do form relationships with each other. Individual female bottlenose dolphins have got a flexible network of dolphins that they hang out with. They sometimes have dolphins that they particularly enjoy spending time with and have preferred companions for different activities. For example, they have dolphins that they forage with and dolphins that they socialise with, in the same way as we have friends at work and then friends that we go to the pub with. Bottlenose dolphins who have got a close bond will often swim together and in synchronisation. They'll sometimes swim with their pectoral fins touching, a bit like us holding hands, and they sometimes gently stroke each other or rub against each other. Female bottlenose dolphins spend a long time with their calves, which generally stay close to their mothers until they're weaned at about 4 years old. On the other hand, the male bottlenose dolphins play no part at all in raising their calves, and they tend to live fairly solitary lives, sometimes forming alliances of 2s or 3s, and sometimes just splashing about on their own in the oceans. Orcas, on the other hand, live in matriarchal pods. Orcas are all classed as the same species, but they have very, very different ecotypes, which is to say, groups. the different ecotypes have got both physical differences and very different ways of life. For example, different ecotypes have got different diets and different ways of hunting. Some orca ecotypes, such as the fish-eating orcas of the Northeast Pacific, have got very complicated communities made up of groups within groups. The smallest group size is a matrilineal unit made up of a mum, her children, and her grandchildren, and sometimes even great-grandchildren. Multiple matrilines make up a pod, which is made up of somewhere between 1 and 3 matrilines. Multiple pods make up a clan, which consists of somewhere between 2 and 10 pods, which share similar dialects, and multiple clans make up a community. Other orca ecotypes, such as the mammal-eating orcas in the Northeast Pacific, also live in matrilineal groups with quite well-defined membership, but they're not as large or as stable as the fish-eating ecotype. Now, different orca ecotypes don't generally meet each other, but when they do, it tends to go quite badly. So going back to the orcas of the Northeast Pacific, there was a documented case of 3 mammal-eating orcas who were just swimming along, minding their own business, and encountered a pod of fish-eating orcas near Vancouver Island. The entirety of the fish-eating pod ganged up on these poor orcas and chased them out of the region. The fish-eating orcas had clearly recognised the mammal-eating orcas as other and had reacted with extreme hostility. Now, this is quite interesting because the 2 orca ecotypes have got completely different diets, so it wasn't a case of competition. Perhaps it was simply a case of orca xenophobia, who knows? Now, orcas have got incredible intelligence, and they work together as teams a lot of the time, often in slightly ruthless ways. For example, Antarctic orcas swim through the pack ice in search of seals to snack on. When a pod of orcas reaches an area of pack ice, they spread out and start doing this, spy hopping, where they lift their head out of the water and have a look round to see if they can spot any seals. When an orca finds its unlucky little seal, it spy hops a few times around the ice, just checking that it's got the right species of seal and it looks nice and tasty. And then it disappears for about 30 seconds to go and get the rest of the gang, who will also spy hop around the poor seal. After a couple of minutes, the group makes a collective decision to either leave that poor seal alone, much to its relief, I'm sure, or to attack. If the orcas decide to attack, they will swim towards the seal in a line, with their tails pumping in synchronization. This makes a wave about 1 meter high, which washes that seal into the water. Orca and other regions have got different ways of catching their food. So, for example, orcas in the Norwegian fjords, they tend to hunt herring. To catch these, a group of orcas will work together to herd the fish into a sphere, and they'll then slap their tails on the surface of the water to stun the fish. Now, one of the most interesting things about orcas hunting is it seems that they can deliberately train their young in catching food. Some orcas catch this lovely, adorable little elephant seal on beaches. And to do this, orcas deliberately beach themselves on the shore. They strand themselves. Now, if this works out, it's got a huge payoff for the orcas because they get a delicious elephant seal. But it carries a risk. If it goes wrong, and the orca gets permanently stranded, then it will die, and presumably the elephant seal will have a good laugh. So orcas have been observed practicing stranding and refloating themselves on beaches where there aren't any elephant seals. And it's here that young orcas learn how to beach successfully and then refloat themselves. Orca mums will push their calves up onto the beach and then pull them back down into the sea to help them learn and practice. Adult orcas sometimes also throw the poor elephant seals towards the orca calves so that they can learn how to catch these animals. So this is a clear case of dolphins teaching each other new skills. Orcas are able to have a profound impact on their environment. They're such powerful, efficient hunters that orca predation is probably a major regulator of some prey populations and can actually change entire ecosystems. For example, orcas around the Aleutian Islands in the North Pacific have hugely changed the ecosystem. These waters used to contain kelp forests, and these kelp forests provided habitats to all sorts of species. Sea urchins love to munch on kelp, but luckily for the ecosystem, sea otters were there to eat the sea urchins, keeping sea urchin numbers under control and letting the kelp forests flourish. And this all ticked along quite nicely until the 1990s, when a group of orcas decided that the sea otters looked like quite a tasty snack and started eating sea otters. Now, because orcas are quite big, they needed to eat a lot of sea otters in order to feel full, and that they did, munching their way through the sea otter population until there were hardly any left. So, of course, this meant that the sea urchin population exploded and the kelp forests were left pretty much destroyed, changing the whole ecosystem. It's thought that orcas have actually driven entire species to extinction. Orcas appeared about 10 million years ago, and around this time, the number of cetacean species declined by more than half. It's thought that orcas were hounding species to extinction. Now, I might have portrayed orcas in a bit of a bad light here, but they do have a lighter side. They're capable of showing empathy towards each other. In one case, a member of a group of orcas in Patagonia had a damaged jaw and couldn't eat properly. This elderly orca was looked after and fed and kept alive by her family. And orcas do have quite a playful side as well. For example, as with this orca, just leaping out of the ocean for the fun of it. They play games and sometimes also copy one another's games. For example, some years ago, there was a case of a female orca who started pushing around a dead salmon with the top of her head. This quickly turned into a bit of a dead salmon craze, which spread to the other two pods in the community, so that for a few weeks, all the orcas in the community had to have their dead salmon toy. And then, almost as quickly as dead salmon had come into fashion, they went out of fashion. The craze was over. Intriguingly, orcas are one of only a handful of species that go through the menopause. Nobody's really sure why this is, but it's thought to be, with orcas, as with humans, grannies are very important. Granny orcas are more of a help to the group by supporting their existing descendants than by having more children. So, orcas are a very widespread mammal. The females go through the menopause. They form strong communities. They have dialects. They can be fashionable. They can be playful. They can be kind. They can destroy their environment. They can be ruthless. And they have the dubious honour of being one of the few species known to have wiped out entire species. Remind you of any other species? Now, while dolphins and humans inhabit completely different environments, there have been some famous cases of human-dolphin interactions. In New Zealand, a bottlenose dolphin, christened Moko by locals, was known to play and interact with swimmers off the beach. In 2008, a pygmy sperm whale mother and calf stranded on the beach, and despite the best efforts of human rescuers to get them back into the ocean, they re-stranded another 4 times. And at this point, the humans were thinking that the kindest thing, really, would just be to put the poor animals out of their misery. But at the last minute, Moko appeared and saved the day by guiding the pygmy sperm whales around a series of shallow sandbars and back out into the sea. We also get specific bottlenose dolphins known to be resident around the UK, interacting with locals, following fishing boats, or just riding the waves made by boats. For example, Fungi, who lived around Kerry in Ireland, was so popular that he eventually had a statue built in his honour. There have been quite a few accounts of humans and dolphins working together. For example, during a race, when a sailor fell overboard, the race was halted to search for the sailor, but the seas were quite rough, and the sailor was treading water for a couple of hours, waiting to be found. During this time, a search party saw dolphins approach and then move in a particular direction. Wondering whether this was a signal, the search boat followed the dolphins, who led them directly to the sailor. In Iceland, orcas and fishermen are known to work together. The orca show the fishermen where to lay their nets, and in return, the orcas get to feed on part of the catch. They then lead the fleet to the next fishing grounds. And in Brazil, human fishermen have been cooperating with bottlenose dolphins for generations to catch fish. When the fishermen clap, dolphins will herd fish into the desired areas for fishermen in muddy lagoon areas. The dolphins then perform a distinctive dive to signal to the fishermen that it's time to cast their nets for the fish. Now, unfortunately, the vast majority of interactions between humans and dolphins are very damaging to dolphins. One of the biggest problems facing marine life is pollution. It's difficult to know the full impact of this, but it's thought that plastic pollution kills around 100,000 marine mammals every year. Part of the problem is that dolphins often mistake plastic for food. If you're swimming around in the ocean and you're using echolocation to catch your food, it's quite easy, for example, to get floating plastic bags confused with nice juicy jellyfish. As a result, dolphins often eat plastic thinking it's food. This can actually cause them to starve as they feel full and also can't fit any actual food into their stomach because they've got a stomach full of plastic. So, on a lighter note, there are things we can do to help dolphins and other marine mammals. You could join one of our Sea Watches. Sea Watches are a national citizen science programme, meaning that anyone can take part. You don't need to be a scientist. And during these surveys, we gather valuable data on marine mammals. But one of the key things we can all do in our day-to-day lives is to reduce, reuse, and recycle the amount of plastic that we use to help protect dolphins and the other animals that live in the oceans. So thank you all for listening. We've got about 15 minutes left, and we'll give that time over to questions. So if you could put any questions in the chat, and Holly will sort through them and ask the questions.
Thanks very much, Yolanda. I liked the story about the dolphin that cleaned its own tank. I think a few of us have dogs or other pets that we'd like them to clean up after themselves as well. We also had a dolphin in Cumbria. I don't know if anyone here on this talk remembers Mara, who was in Maryport. But yeah, we had a dolphin, a bottlenose dolphin, I think she was. Oh, so I've got a couple of questions that got sent by email, so I'm just gonna get those up. Let's see. So one of the questions was, how did they test the intelligence of the dolphin? So yeah, I think basically, what did they do?
Yeah, good question. It's very difficult to test, and it is particularly difficult to test with an animal like dolphins who live in a completely different environment to us. And so in a way, it's not really fair. It's quite difficult to do a fair test, if that makes sense. One test that's often used and was used with dolphins and that they passed was to see if they could recognize themselves in a mirror. So by putting a mark, for example, a plaster on a dolphin, the dolphins could try and get the plaster off, could recognize it in the mirror. And that's thought to be a sign that they're quite intelligent animals. So elephants, for example, are another animal that's passed that test. So that would be one way. Also, I think the way in which cetacean societies are ordered speaks to quite a high level of intelligence, really.
Yeah. We've got a question that says, does human-made noise affect dolphins?
Yes, is the short answer. Yes, it does. So sound travels a lot more easily through water than it does through air. So sound travels more in water. And also dolphins rely a lot on their hearing, and particularly using echolocation to find things. Loud noises, for example, from noisy boats, can make it more difficult for dolphins to navigate and to find their way around. Yeah. Also, if you think about it, dolphins just aren't used to loud noises in the ocean. If you look at it on a kind of evolutionary timescale, loud noises in the ocean have been around for, maybe 50, 70 years. And that's nowhere near enough time for dolphins to have evolved to be able to deal with this, basically.
Are there any indications that dolphins adapt to human disturbance at all? And I think you might have just started to answer that at the end of your last answer.
They haven't had. They can't kind of evolve to deal with recent changes. For example, sound, just because they haven't had time, basically. But because they're intelligent animals, they are able to kind of find workarounds, if that makes sense. So, for example, learning to stay away from people, or if they have good experiences with people, then they can become quite friendly. So yeah, they're able to learn.
Mm-hmm. Someone said yes, there is evidence that dolphins are having to speak up and make louder vocalizations to communicate. So yeah, thanks for that, Emma. Is there any evidence that climate change is impacting on dolphins?
It will do, particularly with food sources. So if, for example, fish, if the distribution of fish is changing, which it will be due to climate change, then that's going to have a big knock-on effect on cetaceans. If their food source has diminished or increased or moved, then that will affect cetaceans and where they live.
Yeah. I think there's just one more question that was, where is it at? Oh yeah, when we've been on holiday, we've seen dolphins off St. Bees Head, so that's just like further north in Cumbria. Do you know what these are most likely to be?
I would think there would be bottlenose dolphins. but you do get harbour porpoises around the area. And they're often mistaken for dolphins. So it depends a bit on kind of the circumstances in which you saw them. So harbour porpoises, you see them when the sea is really, really calm, because they just sort of just gently roll through the water almost. And they've got quite a triangular fin. So dolphins' dorsal fin is curved backwards, whereas with porpoises it's more triangular. So if they had a curved dorsal fin, it would have been a bottlenose dolphin, I would expect. If it was triangular, it would have been a harbour porpoise. And also the behaviour can be quite a big clue. So bottlenose dolphins can be quite inquisitive, whereas harbour porpoises, they just want to stay away from people. So if they were going away from you, they would have been more likely to be harbour porpoises.
Great, thanks. I think that was all the questions.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We have got another talk on the 17th of May by Holly, all about the sharks of Morecambe Bay. And you can also look at our other upcoming events on the website. The programme is called The Bay, A Blueprint for Recovery. We do actually have a shark egg case hunt on Saturday at the Roundhouse on Walney Island for anyone who wants to come and help monitor sharks. Okay, thank you very much.